Eve.
Roast.
Right, well, hello and good evening to everybody, particularly the people who are joining us on YouTube. And Mike will tell me if we are indeed available on YouTube, so hopefully we are, and we'll be able to get going. So first of all, I'm going to get my slides up. Well, you will do shortly. Can't you even hear me? Oh, no, you can't, can you? Good grief. Right, I'm back. I'm busy saying welcome to everybody. Didn't turn the microphone on. Told you it was going to be one of those nights. So, hello, good evening, and welcome everybody. I am about to get the YouTube end of things working, and then I will be with you in the way I would hope to be. So, let me just get my slides up, and we're good to go. Right, so hello, good evening and welcome everybody. Officially, we are kicking off almost on time. Right, tonight we are looking at Photoshop brushes. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Elaine Giles. I'm a trainer for much longer than I would care to admit, and my slides have just vanished. What have you done? What have you done? My slides just totally vanished and I didn't touch them. Let me get my slides back. What on earth happened there? Right.
I can't see your screen.
They're back. See your screen? Ah, right, okay. Let's take that back and start again. Right, that's what happened. Leave it alone, Mike. Leave it alone, and let me get back to Keynote. Right. A nice false start. We always like that, don't we? So as I was saying, I'm Elaine Giles. I'm a trainer and I currently present the Mac Bytes podcast. I am also the user group manager for the Northwest Adobe user group here in the UK. And we run face-to-face meetings. We run face-to-face meetings and we also run online meetings. But straight on with tonight, I'm going to go straight into the demo. And I believe we are already having problems in Connect, but hopefully everything is good to go on YouTube. So if everybody bears with me for a second, I will be back. Okay, it has cut off my screen share. That's not good. So I'm sharing again, but everybody on YouTube can still see me. So 1 second while we get everybody up to date and we're all on the same page and we can get going. So, not the best start to the evening, but look on the bright side, can only get better from here. Right, Photoshop brushes. So I have in here a default setup. This is actually Photoshop CC 2014, which is the very, very latest version of Photoshop. It doesn't matter if you have an older version, the brushes haven't really changed in a long time. But if there are any differences, then I will point them out, and there are a few little gotchas, so I will talk about that. So first thing I'm going to need is a new file. So I'm just going to get a new file up there. And I have already got the brush tool active, but if you haven't, you press the B key to get the brush tool. And as you can see, when you do that, I have had a brush in use here that was a bird shape. So that's why my pointer is a bird shape. If I go up here to the option bar and open up that menu, this is where you control all of the brushes. So I'm going to change that to a simple round brush in there and then take you through what you've actually got here in relation to controls for your brushes. And it can get pretty complicated in here, but I'm going to take you through it step by step, and it's not as bad as it looks. The first thing you have is the size of the brush, and that's measured in pixels. So that is 200 at the moment. You can actually be very precise. If you want it 202 pixels, you can do that just by typing it in. The hardness refers to the edges of the brush. So as I click in there, you can see it's a very hard edge brush. But as I go in here and change that hardness, so slide it down to halfway, and click, it softens the edges up completely. So those are the two options that you have available from the top there. Now I always find, particularly with the size, that it doesn't make sense to keep going back to this window and making changes there, because you can do it with shortcut keys. They are the square bracket keys. If you remember no other shortcut in Photoshop, the square bracket keys are your friend. So the left square bracket key takes it down in size and the right square bracket key takes it up. Now we've got that at the moment set to a midpoint in terms of hardness around the edges. But if I do that and I keep pressing that shift and left square bracket, and now it's much softer. So Shift and the square brackets changes the hardness. Now I'm doing it the other way now. I'm pressing the right square bracket key and the Shift key. And now that takes it up so it's 100% hard edged. So with the square bracket keys, that changes the size, and the Shift square bracket keys changes the softness or the hardness. So good, very good shortcut keys to remember there. But back to in here, which was where we were going to look at everything in here. You also have a preview on the left-hand side, preview of what's going to happen with that brush. Now that is much more important when you're using a Wacom tablet or any other kind of tablet like that. It gives you an idea of directionality and what the brush will actually look like in terms of pressure points. Now the next thing is this area down here, which is a preview. In fact, it's like a thumbnail track showing you your previous brushes. And that can be incredibly useful. The first thing it can do is if you can't remember which brush you selected, then you've got the last 7 listed in there and you can just quickly click on one and it activates that brush and you can then reuse it. So just using that brush there. But if you have uninstalled a brush, which I had, and you click on there, it will bring that brush back even though I had uninstalled it. So very, very useful. So if I look through the brushes I've got here, I don't have that bird brush. But because it was one of the brushes I'd used just before we came on air, it's still available for me. So you do get the 7 there to work back through. Then you have the gear icon at the top, which opens up the palette menu. And there's a lot of options available in here. So I will go through some of these as well. First of all, you've got your new brush preset. Well, we're going to look at creating new brushes shortly. So at the moment, I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to actually activate it and take you through it, but you have got that option. But what is more appropriate at the moment is changing the look of this palette. So initially it's set to small thumbnail. As I say, this is a clean install and everything is the default. So small thumbnail is the default. But if you have named your brushes, then you can choose text only and it actually gives you a name of the brush there. So as I scroll down, you see right down at the bottom I've got some chalk and dry brushes and all sorts in there. But it actually gives it you by name. Now if you're a visual person, you're going to hate that. But as I say, if you've named the brushes, that can be incredibly useful. Your other option in here, we've seen small thumbnail, you also have large thumbnail. So if you want to see the brush a little bit clearer, then you can make it a large thumbnail. Although, to be honest, sometimes what you see in here doesn't actually bear much relation to what actually happens when you start painting with it. But the option is there. You also have small list. So that gives you a list, but it gives you a preview as well, but it's very, very tiny. Then you have large list, gives you the best of both worlds. So you've actually got the name and you've got a very small thumbnail. But down here, you can also, if I bring that up there, you can see you can scale this. So if you're working with brushes a lot, you can actually scale this outwards and see even more of it. So I'm going to take it so we can see just the names of it there. And then back in here again, and the last option is the stroke thumbnail. So clicking on that, that shows you what the brush would look like. So you have the thumbnail on the left-hand side, but you also have a preview of what it would look like if you were painting with the brush. Now you might think, well, what else would I do with a brush other than paint with it? But all will be revealed shortly. You may be doing other things with a brush. But if what you want to do is to make a stroke with that brush, then this is a great view because it gives you a preview of what that will actually look like. So taking you up there, you can really see some differences in here. Again, these brushes work fantastically with Wacom tablets and pressure sensitivity. So I'm going to turn that back to small thumbnail because that's what most people will have. That's the view most people will probably be working in. And let's have a look what else you've got. Now, this show recent brushes is what I was talking about earlier, which is this thumbnail track of previous brushes. I take the tick out of there and that disappears. I do find that very useful, to be honest. So I'm going to leave that turned on. I think it's a good way to get back to brushes I've recently used. Fantastic way to flick between two brushes. I just use that and go backwards and forwards between them. Then there's a preset manager, which we will be having a look at. But these 4 options are very important. Reset brushes, load brushes, save brushes, and replace brushes. Because this is where you control your brushes. So if I wanted to reset these to the default set of brushes, I would use that option. And I have already actually used that to reset my version of Photoshop. So it should match yours as long as you've not made any changes. So if I click reset brushes there, you'll see it's saying, are you sure you want to replace the current brushes with the default brushes? Now you have an option to append. So if you had some brushes already there that you'd customized, then you could append the default brushes and not lose the brushes. Now, because I've only got the default brushes here, I do want them to be completely replaced. If I don't replace them completely, those nights. So off and on again, and hopefully that will work. Is that working? Can anybody hear me? Is that in Connect? Can you hear me in Connect? Can somebody let me know if they can hear me in Connect? Apparently you can. That's fantastic. I'm definitely having one of those nights, aren't I? No idea what's wrong there, but apparently all is well on YouTube. So if your sound goes and it doesn't come back, I suggest having a look on YouTube. Right, so I was saying in here that I had added some brushes to it. I appended a collection of brushes to my existing brushes rather than replace the brushes. So you could build up quite a lot of brushes in here. I tend not to append, I must admit. I tend to switch between them so I can remember which set I'm working in. Otherwise, I spend ages looking for brushes, but your mileage may vary. It might work better for you to do it a completely different way. Okay, so we've had a look at the options there, but there are still a couple of options with brushes that are not available from within this flyout palette here. So I'm going to go back up here and I'm just going to select everything on there and delete it all. In fact, I'll go over it with white so I can start painting with these brushes again, and I'll put it on a different layer. Right, I have a very simple brush here at the moment. It just looks like that. So a solid brush there. Just take the size down a fraction and show you the other 2 main options here, which is to change the opacity of the brush and to change the flow of the brush. So first of all, the opacity is set to 100 by default. Well, I'll take it down to about 40%. And this time when I draw with it, it looks a grey colour. I haven't changed the colour. What I have done is change the amount of opacity that is on that brush, and that's why it looks grey. Now, as I start drawing over it, you can see it starts to build it up. So if what you're doing with it is you're actually drawing, so we've all seen ink and slide now, the ruler and the pen, so you may want to do something like that. In that case, that's on an iPad, but you get the idea. It's those kind of things. And work much more organically by building it up. So opacity is one thing you can change, but you can also change the flow of it as well. So as I change that, you can see it changes it entirely. What's happening now is, instead of it being a solid, it's actually changing the number of points it adds to it. So I've taken the flow down. So if you think of this as like a spray gun, it's not spraying out as many pixels as it was when the flow was set higher. So those 2 options are available from the options bar there. And really everything here, the brush size, its hardness, the brush tip that you choose, the opacity and the flow all work together to give you a completely different look with what you're doing. Now, a lot of this, what I'm creating on the canvas at the moment, is incredibly basic, but I promise as we move through the session, I'll be doing much more interesting things with brushes. Now, what I'm going to do next is reset that. So set that back to the defaults. So back in here and reset the brushes again, this time to the default. And I don't want to append anything, so that just takes away the extra ones that were there at the bottom. And I am going to add another layer, turn that layer off. And what's going on here? That's better. Right, and I'm going to explain what I meant when I said, and what else would you do with a brush other than brush? Well, one of the things you do with a brush is indeed brush. So if I choose one of these shapes here, and I just draw a line with it, you can see it's actually creating a brush stroke in exactly the same way, or as near as it can replicate, if you actually had a brush in your hand and you pushed on it and you drag it across your canvas. And that changes as I change the opacity and I change the flow. So now I get a completely different look to it. But the other thing that you can do with a brush is to stamp with it. So I'm going to make that brush a little bit bigger. And as I do, you can see that, hopefully. You can see the outline of the brush. And as I click there, I'm just clicking once. So I'm not clicking and holding the left mouse button and dragging it, which is in effect brushing, using brushwork. This time I'm actually stamping things on there. Now that might seem, if you're used to working with brushes, an odd way to work. But because there is a whole range of brushes out there on the internet that you can download, a lot of them work well if they're used as stamps. So you could get copyright brushes, you could get stamps that say confidential or draft or anything else. And they work best when they're just stamped on. And I will show you how to use those and how to actually create them as well. So what I'm going to do in here is start again and actually make a brush. Once I've got a brush in there, I'll show you how you can change all of the configuration options with it and when it would be useful to stamp it and when it would be useful to brush it. And to do that, I have a file. So I'm going onto my other screen and I am opening up a file, which is supposed to be that one. Is that the one? No, it's not. Now my brushes have disappeared. Oh, it really is one of those nights, isn't it? Come on, where's my brushes? Where have my brushes disappeared to? They have, they have completely vanished. That's not good, but it's okay. I have some extra ones as well. Here we are. Let's open up that one. There we go. This is the file I'm looking for. These are not brushes at the moment. These are just images. You can actually download these. I'll make sure the links are available after the session. These are just images that you can download from a site called PSD Graphics. If you've never been there, it's a fantastic site. I highly recommend you go and have a look there. And what I've got are 3 different splashes. So I've got the pink splash at the top. I've then got the red splash and I'll have the blue one at the back. Now, as I say, they're not brushes. So at the moment, if I wanted to work with these on another canvas, I'd have to bring them in. And then, of course, I'd have the problem that they're the wrong colour, things like that. So what I need to do is to make that into a brush. And it really is pretty easy to make a brush. So making sure I've got the pink one selected at the top. This is the one I'm going to start with. So I'm going to make a selection. So it's a little bit smaller than the full canvas. But once I've got my selection there, I'm going to go up here to Edit and down to Define Brush Preset. And when I do that, I get this dialog box. Now, there's not much to this dialog box. All it needs me to do is give it a name. So in this case, it would be Pink Brush. But all brushes are black and white. So if pink brush meant something to me particularly, then I could call it pink brush. But obviously the point of this is that you want to be able to use this and make it any colour you like. So I'm going to call it Splash 1. We're going to have 3 of these splashes. So Splash 1. Now, something else to be aware of at this point. I know that we have people with us tonight who are not using Photoshop CC or even CS6. Going backwards, if you go back to CS5.5, there was a maximum size for brushes. So CS5.5 was the cutoff point. CS5.5 and backwards, only go up to 2,500 pixels for the brushes. After CS55, so from CS6 and CC and CC 2014, you can have brushes up to 5,000 pixels. So if you download some brushes and you're on an old version and they don't work, that's the problem. They're probably too big. For that reason, when you download a lot of brushes or you're making brushes, it's a good idea to make the 5,000 size brush, but also then halve the size and make another collection at 2,500. And that way you've got backwards compatibility with the older versions of Photoshop. Now that one is 4,576. Now that's fine for this version of Photoshop. And I'm going to click OK, and that's it. That is all there is to creating that brush. So I'm going to press the B key to access the brush tool. And as I move now, you can see my mouse pointer, as I'm moving it around, has actually got that precise shape on it. You can't see it too well because we have the shape already there, but it has selected it. And just to prove the point, I'm going to go up to the brushes and show you that it's that one there at the bottom. So 4576, it isn't referring to a magical mystical number, it's actually the size of it. So it was the size that it was when I created the brush. But of course I can take that down in size with the square brackets. So moving away from there, and I'm using the left square bracket and taking that down, and you can see it's actually shrinking down. And if I click there, we'll get an instance of that brush. So that it has actually worked. We have created our first brush. Now I'm just going to repeat that process for the second one. So this one is the red brush. And up to Edit and Define Brush Preset. And this time I'm going to call it Splash 2. And that one is 4976. So we're all quite large at the moment. Let's check that one. And yes, it's added that one as well. So there are the two that I've created. And that leaves one more to be created. Yes, I know, go away. Which is the blue one. Now, can anybody spot, if you're in the live chat, anybody spot a big difference between the pink and the red compared to the blue? Anybody got any idea? And I don't mean the shape of it. Anybody spot anything that's slightly different? I'll put the red one back and then the pink one back so you can have a look at it. But there is a bit of a difference between them. So let's turn those off and have a look at that blue one. Let's concentrate on that blue one. Anybody got the idea? Yes, some have said bigger. I'm getting one message that says less splodge. You're quite right. But the difference is, and a couple of you have got it there is a gradient on this one. What you've got on here is differing shades. And I said in a brush, it's black and white. And it will be. It will convert that to black and white. And that's quite important when you come to use brushes. And there are things that you can do about it when you come to use brushes. So first thing, you need to create a brush with the blue one. So back up to Edit and back down to Define Brush Preset. And this one is Splash 3. And we now have our 3 brushes. So the next thing to do is to get a new layer and start to work with these brushes. So I'm going to turn the blue one off and make sure that we have a white fill there so I can start working on it. And I'm going to go and get one of the brushes. So the first one I'm going to use is the pink one, which was this one here. And make sure in there that everything is set right, and I think we'll make it a bit smaller. Otherwise I'm going to need lots and lots of layers to make this work. But just clicking on there, and that one works. So let's try the second one that we made, which was that one. And because I made it at that rather large scale, when I come to use it, I am going to have to make these smaller. So while it's a good idea to make the brushes quite big, somebody's asked, is it a good idea to make the brushes bigger or should you make them smaller? Well, swings and roundabouts. If you make them bigger, then you get full quality. Whereas if you try and scale up a brush, it can get to a point where it pixelates. But if you make them really big, it means that you've then got to scale them down every time you use them. But of course, providing them at 5,000 pixels maximum means that the users, if they do want them much smaller, can make their own derivative brushes from it. It's very simple to do that. All you'd have to do is make it the size you want it and then go Edit, Define Brush Preset, and it would create a new brush at a much smaller size. But we said the third one was slightly different. So I'm going to go in and get that third brush and bring that across, make it a little bit smaller. and click on there. Now, it does have some kind of gradient with it when I do it in black. So how it's doing that is adding opacity. It's not actually changing the colour to make it grey. It's actually it's changing the opacity of certain areas. Now, that's important. So I'm going to add another layer here. And this time, I'm going to change the colour that I'm painting with. So let's say I go and paint with red this time. So same splodge, but red. And it works, it makes it red. There is even in there a little bit of a gradient, some kind of opacity with it. But the problem with it is, it looks a bit flat. It looks very flat when you just change the colour of the brush and then just stamp on there. It makes it a little bit flat. So for that reason, there are other ways to work with brushes that you can colorize them in different ways. And there's three main ways to colorize them. Now I'm going to come on to that later. So we're going to leave those brushes there. We certainly don't want to lose those brushes. But I do want to show you that if you've got lots of brushes, you can actually import brushes. Now you may think you've already done that, but I haven't. What I did do was go up here and go across to the gear icon and say that there were some brushes that were available, brush sets available from the bottom. But there's only a limited number of those available from the bottom. And the problem with that is, what if I've downloaded them from somewhere? They're not automatically available in there. Now, first question's usually, can you make them available from within there? Well, you can if you want to, but you can also load them in. So if I go up to load brushes, that opens up my files here. I'm going to go to my data, and in importing brushes, I have some brushes to import. Now, just to show you, I've got an application here called default folder, which gives me a preview of files, but it doesn't preview the brushes. So I don't get a preview of these brushes when I'm importing them. But I have the brushes there to import. They are a collection of brushes, and that's indicated by the fact that the extension is ABR, Adobe Brush Files. So it is a collection of squirrels, believe it or not. So I'm going to add those in. They are added to the bottom of my brushes, and I'm going to go back and do that a couple more times. So loading more brushes in there. And it should go back to the right ones, and I have 30 flying birds, which I'm going to add as well. Those are the ones that you got a sneak preview of before. There we go, 30 flying birds. And it's added all of those in there. So I've got the squirrels and I've got the birds in there as well. So let's have a look at one of these birds. Won't look great in red, but you get the idea. And you can, of course, use these brushes by scaling them up and scaling them down as well. So that's adding those brushes. Now you're going to want to know where to get those brushes from. And I've got a whole list of resources, which I'll show you at the end, of where I got all these brushes from. But it is that simple to import those brushes. Now, if you know that you have got these collections of brushes and you know that either you've created them or you know that you're going to want them available multiple times, then what you can do is put them in a specific place in your file system. And if you do that, then they will be available from that drop-down menu that we've already seen. Now, I have a folder here, and I'm going to talk you through where it is rather than navigate to it because it's quite a long path. On the Mac, you need to go to the Macintosh HD, the Users folder, your User folder, Library, Application Support. Now, that's all fairly standard so far. Then move on to the Adobe folder, and then there'll be another folder, and the name of that folder will depend on which version of Photoshop you're using. Here I'm using Photoshop CC 2014, so it's that folder, and within there, presets. And once you're in there, which is where we are at the moment, there's a whole range of presets available, and one of them is brushes. So if you have a collection of brushes and you want those available from that drop-down menu inside Photoshop, so you don't have to go away and add them in manually by going to locate them, then put them in that brushes folder there, and then they will become available. Now, if you are on Windows, don't know how many Windows users we've got with us. Who's going to admit to that? On Windows, they are in a slightly different location. They are still going to be in the brushes folder inside presets, inside your Photoshop folder, inside an Adobe folder, but then it starts to change. So working back up the chain, You will then need to be in your documents and settings, and you will find them in there. The precise location is going to depend on the precise version of Windows. Luckily, the Mac is a little bit easier. It's always going to be in the application support. The only folder difference there will be the version of Photoshop. But that is a great way to make sure that those brushes are available from the menu itself. Now, another way to make the brushes available, particularly these splash brushes that I created. So we know that they are available from within here. They are the 3 brushes before we added the squirrel brush. So those 3 in the middle. And if I want to make those available, I can go to, where's my options here? I need to go to my, no, my presets is what I need. That's what I need. Not my define brush presets. Where has it gone? Love it when I'm looking for things and it's disappeared. Oh, come on, come and help me. Preset manager is what I'm looking for. Presets is down near the bottom. It is. It's there. Preset manager. So edit presets, preset manager. And this lets you manage all your presets. All your presets. Now, because at the moment I've been playing around with the brushes. Brushes is your default option. But you use the same preset manager for swatches, gradients, styles, patterns, contours, custom shapes and tools. And switching between those options there changes what's available below it. So there they all are. These are what I actually have installed and ready to use at the moment, including these 3 here, which are the splash brushes that I'm looking for. Now I'm going to zoom in there so you can see it's these 3 here. And what I'm doing there is making a selection. And as I move from one to the other, it's deselecting the first one. And I need all 3 selected. So I'm holding down the Command key on the Mac. That would be the Control key on Windows. And selecting all 3 of them. And then I'm going across here and saying Save Set. So clicking on Save Set. And I don't want it saving in there. I want it in my data folder. And this time I'm exporting brushes, so I want to put it in there. This is where you get to name the brush set. So this is going to be the ABR file that you're saving. So I can call this Splashes and save that. And those brushes are now saved. They're saved out so I could share them. So I'm going to go over here. So I'm on my other screen, and what I'm doing is opening up that folder that you saw me save that to. So let's close all of this out of the way and concentrate on what we're actually looking at, which is splashes.abr. Now I can actually share that with you. So I'm going to open up Chrome and I have a way to share it with you. So I'm dragging and dropping that to an upload service, and when it's uploaded and I've got a URL, I will put that in our chat window, and I'll make sure if you're watching on YouTube, it will be underneath the video. So look underneath the video. So that's saved out just my brushes. It also means in here though that if I wanted, so if I'd got 1,000 brushes in here, and I don't recommend that, it slows down the more you've got, but I only really want to use 20, but they're not all from the same brush set. They didn't originate from the same brush set. Nothing to stop you selecting one of the birds and one of these scribbles and one of the default ones and one of the splashes, and making your own custom set of brushes. It's a fantastic way to make sure you've got just the brushes you want with you when you need them. Now, the good news is that that has uploaded, and I'm now clicking the share button, and now I've got a link that I can share with you. So it's coming. Somebody tell me if that link is working, and it will be coming to YouTube shortly. So let me know how that goes. Right, so we have loaded brushes that are part of Photoshop as a default. We've loaded brushes we've downloaded from other locations, and we've even created our own brushes. Another reason that you might want to create your own brushes is that you can sell these things. People make a living making brushes and putting them on marketplace sites. And what you will download is actually an ABR file. It might be zipped up with some licensing information, but it will be an ABR file. Now I can see that I've got a question And the question that I have is, can you use these in Pixelmator? And the good news is, yes, you can. You can open an Adobe brush file straight into Pixelmator. You can import it into the brushes palette in Pixelmator in just the same way as you do in Photoshop. The actual process is slightly different for doing it, but the concept is identical, and it will read in all of those files. Now, Pixelmator itself doesn't create Adobe brush files, but you can see that you can make a brush in Photoshop from any graphic. So if you've got artwork in Pixelmator, just save it out in a format that Photoshop can read, take it into Photoshop, and then you can make the brush from Photoshop and then share it back for people on Pixelmator. So yes, they are very forgiving when it comes to sharing brushes. Okay, so we've done all of that. Let's move on to the next step. So I see people are downloading those brushes, so that's great. Now, I'm going to open up a file and just show you a really practical use for that kind of brush, a very simple brush. So I have some images. Here's hoping they've not vanished as well, because pretty much everything else has tonight, hasn't it? But I did have some images somewhere, so they have, you know, they've disappeared. It's one of those nights. Let me see. Come on, come on. I had some pictures. They were just pictures. That was all they were. They must be here somewhere. And you know what? They're not. I'll tell you what. I'm going to be crazy. I am. I'm going to make a new file. And I'm going to use these bird ones. What it was a picture of a sky, just a blue sky. So what I'll do is I'll cheat. I'll make a blue sky. I'll do that with the gradient tool. I don't want that gradient to be that colour though. So I'm going to, let's edit that gradient, which should be available from within here. Come on, need a gradient, need a gradient. Let's edit that gradient. I want sort of that blue at the top, but I don't particularly want these colours at the bottom. So I'm going to delete those off the gradient. In fact, it's deleting everything all wrong, but I will start from scratch. Right. I need a gradient in here that is bluish. You're not even going to give me a good start, are you? So I'll start from scratch. Right. I want a colour. I don't want that colour. I want a nice palish blue so I can make a blue sky. That's a good start. And this end, I want a much lighter blue. So double clicking there and getting a very, very pale blue. So something like that. Okay. And I now have my gradient. So you're going to draw me a decent gradient now. There we go. Let's pretend it's a skyline. It's a beautiful sky actually. And it's quite like that here at the moment. Now what I am going to do now is use the D key to go back to my default colours. And I'm going to activate the brush tool. I'm going to look at these bird brushes. And I had one of them, that was the walking bird. Where was the walking bird? I think he was towards the top somewhere. But I also want a flying bird here, so I'm just going to pick one at random. I can move it across and have a preview. That's not really the look I'm going for. It's more like that, I think. And what I'm going to do is just click once. And that is when a stamp is useful. So I said that there were two ways to use the brushes. There was the brush way of doing it, which is creating a brush stroke, but there's also the stamping method of doing it, and that is a good example of using that. Just making that brush a little bit smaller, and he's now got some friends there. So I'm just stamping that on there. Now, one of the other brushes that I loaded, and I know you're dying with curiosity, aren't you? What does the squirrel look like, is what you're thinking. And I've got lots of squirrels in there. There are lots of different squirrels. They're all across there. And I think from memory, this one was a nice looking chap. So I'll click on that. And you get an outline of him, as you see. And I'll just click there so his feet are slightly off the bottom. And there you've got a squirrel. Now that also serves to show you that although I said they're black and white, and they stay black and white, you can use a different colour. So for that one, to be honest, it would have been a better idea to have a brown one. So let's just undo him. Go and change the colour there to brownish. Let's get a brownish colour. Something like that. And click on him there. And now he's a brown colour. But it's still quite flat. But it's serving to show you that you can actually use an entire photograph if you want and turn that into a brush. So it doesn't have to be solid shapes. It will even take a photograph and change it by using opacity to create a grayscale effect with it. And we have our squirrel and our birds there. Right, so I also said I'm going to show you how to colorize effectively. And I'm going to go back. Let's get a new file. And I'm going to go back to those brushes that I created. So the ones that you now have a copy of, which were the splashes. And they were in here somewhere, weren't they? Where are my splashes? It's that one there I'm looking for particularly. So I think that's way too big here. So I'm making that much smaller. Oh, you can see it coming in. It is indeed very, very big. There we go. So I've got that one there. Now I'm going to get a new layer, put this on a layer of its own. And I want it to be a kind of reddish colour, let's say a reddish colour. So I'm going to go and choose a colour. So not bright red particularly, just reddish. So there, that looks about right. And click once. And you can see it does make it red, and it does even manage to give it some kind of depth by using the opacity. But it is actually quite flat, to be honest. And there are ways that you can work on that so it's not quite so flat. So I'll turn that layer off, and I'm going to make a new layer. This time I want the default colour, so I actually want to do exactly the same thing. Just click once and get that shape. And you can see I do have the opacity in there, but I wanted it red. And although that I've got more opacity there, and therefore I've got more of a gradient on it, it's not red. Now there is a way to make it red, and I've left the other layer there to show you a comparison. Now how to do this is get yourself another layer, and on this layer I'm going to change my brush. I'm going to get just a solid brush on it and make sure that it does actually cover that. And this time I'm going to go back and get the red colour, so it was around this point here, somewhere like that. And I'm just going to click once. Now I know that's not a good look, but if I change this blend mode, who's going to be fast enough in the chat to tell me what I'm going to change it to? Because I want this layer to interact with the layer below it and take the colour from this layer, that's a clue, and interact with the greyish pixels, so the black and the opacity, on the one below. And I'm going to do that with colour. And when I do that, I get a completely different effect than if I just used the brush and made the colour of it red. You can see I've got much darker shadows in this. I can change the effect by changing the opacity. So if I don't want the effect to be quite so red, if I want it much darker, I could do that. You could also, in here, you've got the fill that you can play around with. So you can change that as well. But that is the look that I want. What I wanted to try and do was harness the gradient effect. Now, just to show you that it's taking two layers. So the top layer is the colour and the lower layer is the shape. I'm going to just group those together. And the only reason that I'm grouping them is so I can turn them on and off and we can do a comparison. That's the only reason I'm doing it. It's no magic sauce there, no other reason that I'm doing it. So I'm going to turn that one off and turn that one back on. So that was what it managed by choosing red as the colour and clicking the brush once. But this is what it managed if I did it in two steps. If I used a black brush, so the colour that I had active was black, click once, then make a new layer, put the colour on that top layer, and then change its blend mode to colour. And that gives me much more depth to it. So that's an important way to work, particularly with stamps. If you want to provide some reality and depth to a stamp, that's a very good way of doing it. There are other things, of course, you can do as well. You could merge those together, you could add drop shadows on it and other effects, but that way you retain all the control of it. So I particularly like working that way. I very seldom would choose a colour for a brush and just paint away with it or even stamp with it, because you lose quite a lot in the translation. Now, just to give you another idea of that, I have some other brushes. This is one of the standard demonstrations to show you the different varieties of colouring with effects here. So I've shown you that one. Let's go get a new file and load in some extra brushes. So I'm going to go back to my brushes and load some brushes. And these are they're really useful brushes, these, to be honest with you. Let's have a look. Colouring brushes. And these ones are the explosion brushes. I'm going to go for the 5,000 pixel ones, but as you can see, there's 2,500 available for people on older versions. And I'm going to open those. I'm going to do something similar, but I'm going to do the colouring in a different way. Now, I need a new layer. First of all, I need over here to fill this layer with black. So I'm going to work on a black background and go and get one of my brushes. Now, these are explosions, as the name implies. So coming across here and clicking, and that's what you get. So actually, I could use white on that background. Let's do that. And we're not seeing it because I haven't turned it on. There we go. So on this layer, I have the explosion, and the white is showing through. Now, thing with it is, it's not exactly brilliant. It's an explosion, all right, but it's not brilliant. As I'm clicking with it, you can see, one, the brushes are far too big, so I'm making the brush a little bit smaller. You can see the size of it start to come in. I've actually got a second monitor, and I'm getting that outline on the other screen as well. So you can see it's not particularly great. So just make that bigger, and you can actually see it. Come on, come on, click, show me. Let's try a different one. That's not going great, is it? Have I just gone from Connect? Connect has died on me. Oh dear, we're not going to have much fun tonight, are we, at this rate? Okay, what I'm going to have to do, so everybody on YouTube, you're going to have to bear with me, I'm afraid. I'm going to need to get back into Connect because it just died on me. Oh, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. Don't do it on Connect. That's what you're thinking. I'm thinking that right now, funnily enough. But I am endeavouring to get back into Connect and do it rather quickly. So I need to go into there. That's where I need to be. And it's logging me in. It's logging me in. I wonder what everybody's saying in Connect. Where have you gone? Oh, I hope you're keeping them entertained, Mike. Oh, this is going to make a great live. I think I might have to even redo this. Oh dear, love that. Right, I'm not going to be able to run my audio setup. So let's see how bad the audio is. Okay, I'm back in Connect. I am back in Connect. Right, how's my sound? My sound's good, apparently. I've gone right off Connect. Right, you should be able to see my screen again. So slight hiatus there. I was getting another brush way back when. I'm not going to tell you what we've been talking about on YouTube. You'll have to go and watch the replay. Right, I wasn't going up there, was I? I was going to choose a different brushes down here was what I was going to do. That's what I said. And I was going to click on here. That's right. So let me get another one and start again. Let's click on there. There we go. Right, so I was saying they were explosion brushes. But they're not exactly exciting because they're not very well coloured. So my first way of working here would be to do what you've seen me do. Just choose a colour. Now it's explosion, so orange would be a good place to start, wouldn't it? So choose that and click on there. And I've got an orange explosion. It's not bad, but it's still not perfect, is it? Now, one way I could do that is to go in and colour with a layer, which we've seen with the splashes. So I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it a completely different way. This way is the best way to give you the most depth of colour. So to do that, I'm going to go up to Layer and New Adjustment Layer, and then down to Gradient Map. So going into there. And I can just apply any gradient map to it. It's actually chosen that one, but I'm not going to worry about the colour that it's picked. At the moment, it looks pretty similar, but I'm going to go in here and make some changes. So first thing I need to do is to make sure that that one is black. So in there, choose black for that end of it. That really makes it look like the first time I added it. But I'm going to add some extra points to this gradient, and this is how you add extra points to a gradient. Click just below the gradient path and then go and choose a colour. So I want an orangey colour here, quite a bright orangey colour, and that's put that in the middle. But I also want two more. So at the moment, that's an improvement. As it stands, that is an improvement over what we had, but we're going to make it even better. So I'm going to add another gradient point at the 75% location and make that yellowish. So let's choose a yellowy view there. We want it quite intense in the middle. And I'm going to put another one here at 25. And this time I want it much more red. So let's have it a very bright, intense red, but not too red. That looks pretty good. So I've altered the gradient. It started off as orange and white. And at orange and white, it looked as though I just stamped it on in orange. But by adding 2 extra points. So there's actually 5 points on that gradient. It goes through from black to red to orange to yellow and white. And as you can see, you can immediately see the preview and OK there. It is much more realistic. So when it comes to working with brushes and colorizing them, you can get a much better effect by using a gradient than you can just choosing a colour. So let's have a look at, I'm going to again group these so I can toggle them on and off in one go. But that's the only reason that I'm grouping them. This was what we had if I chose orange and clicked with that brush. But this is what we have, a whole different business if you use a gradient to colour it. So you've got there what looks like a photograph of fire just by using a brush, one click, and then adding an adjustment layer. So I remember when I first started with, I actually started with a photo paint or fountain paint, I think, on an Amiga. And I used to look at these artworks and think, oh wow, that must take forever. Because in my mind, what I'd have to do is paint it pixel by pixel by pixel. But you don't, you just need techniques. And I know I've said this before at these live sessions, but if you learn some of the techniques, the ability to paint and draw is actually secondary by a long way. Okay, so that was that one. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I need to get all these Connect windows out of the way now so I can see what I'm doing. I've got lots of Connect windows open now, I can assure you. Right, so we've colorized those brushes. Now, a couple more things to think about with brushes. Nothing now to do with inside Photoshop particularly and using them. The first thing is synchronizing brushes. Now, I've said that available from the brushes, you have, under the gear icon, these brushes that are in your Photoshop install. They're in your application support folder for Photoshop. You can load brushes from anywhere else using the load command. But let's say these brushes that I've got in here now are my favourite ever brushes, and I've got them installed here. Obviously, first thing I could do is to make a brush set of them. And I could carry them around on a pen drive, couldn't I? And I could install them on every machine I work on. But that's what the Creative Cloud is all about. Wouldn't it be fantastic if all my brushes, but not limited to my brushes, what about my gradient presets as well? And my workspaces? Wouldn't it be fantastic if they were all synchronized across all my machines? You know what's coming next. There's a way to do it. If you go up to Photoshop and you go down to Preferences, and this is in a different place on Windows, you'll need to go to the Edit menu and right down to the bottom in Windows. But in here, there is now a dedicated set of settings for syncing things. So the sync settings. Now, this is a new install. I only installed this on this machine last Wednesday, the day it came out. But I deliberately suffered for a week and I didn't synchronize everything. So what you're seeing here is this machine syncing for the very first time up to the Creative Cloud. Because as a new install, you get an option to say, do you want to download what's available in the Creative Cloud, or do you want to upload what's on this machine? And at the moment, I want to upload what's on this machine. Now, I'm already signed in to the Creative Cloud, so I'm signed in using my Adobe ID. And I need to specify what I want to sync, and these are your options when it comes to syncing. You've got preferences, workspaces, actions, brushes, swatches, and so much more in there. But it does make your life a whole lot easier that you can synchronize everything. If you want to select only part of it, you can customize it. You can also select nothing if you don't want to synchronize anything. But I want to synchronize everything, and I want to upload it. And all I have to do is click that upload button and it will go away. It will connect to the Creative Cloud. The way things are going tonight, it's probably going to want my password 17 times, but I'm hoping not. And it's looking through my settings in Photoshop and it is going to upload them eventually, as you can see. There you go. And it's talking about 98 meg. I'm insane. Something's going to crash while it's doing this, but never mind. I'll do it anyway. You can see from the log file exactly what's happening here. And EKG default, that's my workspace. You can see it there getting uploaded. And you can see up here, that's the workspace I'm using. This is my demo workspace. So that's been uploaded. And the styles are being uploaded, patterns, swatches, and everything else is getting uploaded as I'm working. So eventually that should stop. It should get there in the end. I'm going to let it strut its stuff while I explain what then is going to happen. On another machine, if you then want to download these, you can do. You just do exactly the same in reverse. You choose download instead of upload. If you only want the brushes on the secondary machine, or just the brushes and the gradients, then take the option here and change that to custom and just put a tick in what you want to download. Although you can do all of this manually, the Creative Cloud is a fantastic way not only to synchronize machines, but also to back up your settings. I've had hard drives go on me, and although I could probably restore from an image, if I do a clean install of all my software, my settings would have gone, because who backs these settings up manually? I bet nobody in the chat's going to say yes, they do. I know I don't, I must admit. I back it up with my entire backup, but I don't back them up separately. But now with Creative Cloud, I don't have to do that. Don't have to back them up separately at all. So that is saying it is coming to a conclusion. It is reached its 118 meg and it's done, uploaded. So you can see it only takes a couple of minutes as well. And that's it. They're all now backed up into Creative Cloud. So this machine could crash and burn, and the way it's going, it probably will. And I'm safe. All of my settings for Photoshop are up on the Creative Cloud, and I can pull that down whenever I need it. Now, that was synchronizing brushes, syncing your settings. But one more thing to think about with brushes, and that is when you've got lots and lots of brushes, previewing them is a problem. As you've seen tonight, I told you I can't preview that. There's no preview. If I go into Adobe Bridge, so I've got Adobe Bridge installed, there's Adobe Bridge, and it's pointing to a folder that's got the explosion brushes in it. And although it's an Adobe application, and what it's for is for previewing files, and it previews other files, it previews JPEGs, it previews Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, it's fantastic. It does not preview brushes. That is a problem. But there is another application if you're working with a lot of brushes called Brush Pilot. And what this does, it finds brushes all over the place. And I didn't bother tidying up before I did this either. I thought I'd let you see really behind the scenes. What this does is it searches all the hard drives that are attached to this machine, and it pulls in any brushes that it finds. That's what it's doing in the top half on the left. So you can see I've got a lovely folder called Inbound to be sorted. I think it dates back to the last millennium. But I've downloaded some brushes and they're available from the downloads. These importing brush sets and the brush sets here are probably from today. Let's have a look. Yes, that's from today's presentation. So if I go on there, I can see these are brushes that I thought about using. And this is the kind of preview that I can get of them. They're not installed in Photoshop. They're just sitting there on my hard drive. And this is the best way by a mile to preview brushes. Now, it can preview brushes that aren't installed, like these. These are not installed. But down on the lower left-hand corner, you can see I've also got 2 versions of Photoshop installed. And in them, I have 15 brushes. There they are. I'm going to pull this up so we can see them all. These should look incredibly familiar to you. These are the brushes that were appearing when I clicked on the gear icon. And in here, you get a preview of them. So you don't get a preview anywhere else because they are ABR files, but in Brush Pilot, you do. You can actually preview those and get a really good idea of what they would be best used for. So let's have a look at some of these special effects ones. You can change the size of the preview, but it depends on the original size of the brushes, to be honest with you, how well that works. And I have exactly the same brushes installed in CC 2014 because when I installed 2014, it said, do you want to transfer your settings from the old version of Photoshop? And I said yes. So I have exactly the same things installed on here as I have in the old version of Photoshop. So if you are on a Mac, and yes, I'm afraid it is a Mac only application. I don't know personally of anything similar for Windows, but if somebody else does, do let me know. And you can also from here export these, but this is a fantastic way to work with a lot of brushes. I think if you're going to go into the marketplace arena and start selling brushes, this is the best way by far to work with them. So that is Brush Pilot, and I'll make sure that the link for that is available as well. But let me head back into here. And I'm going to do a quick recap. We looked at, on Photoshop brushes, not only creating them, but importing them, exporting them, colorizing them in the best way possible, looked at changing the opacity and the flow, and managing them. And that was when we looked at Brush Pilot. So that's the URL for Brush Pilot. It is brushpilotapp.com. But if you've got a lot of brushes, where do you get them all from? And these are just a few of the sites that I frequent quite often. Brush Easy is one of the standard sites. There are a lot of brushes up there that are completely free, even for commercial purposes, but do check the licensing on these things. And some of the others that I use are Brush Lovers and PS Brushes, but also DeviantArt. That's sort of crowdsourced, and there are a lot of really fantastic brush sets available at DeviantArt. Not just brushes at that one though. DeviantArt is has a whole range of assets that are made available for you. So just a few places that you can go and have a look. Then there was Synchronizing. So they do synchronize between installations, but also push up to the Creative Cloud. So you can not only keep the brushes in sync, but you can also synchronize the entire settings across every application of the Creative Cloud. One of the reasons, I know there isn't a box product anymore, but if you're still on an old version, it's one of the most compelling reasons to move over to Creative Cloud. And what you've seen me work with tonight is Creative Cloud 2014, which, if you are a Creative Cloud subscriber, is included with your subscription, so it doesn't cost anything extra. You can just update. Now, I have had a couple of questions in already about, you had 2 versions of Photoshop installed. Are you insane? Well, it does that automatically, which is good, because previous versions, and I am going back a few years now, used to overwrite whatever version of Photoshop you had installed. And it could be that I need to use an old version of an application. So all of the Creative Cloud applications install alongside your existing installs. So if you do want to switch back between them, you can do. They are completely independent of each other. You will be prompted to import your settings when you install the new versions though, and I elected to do that, and it was very helpful. Now, another bit of news. The Creative Cloud photography program is staying with us. It was 3 apps for £8.78 a month, and there was a minimum 1-year subscription. But it was a great deal when they introduced it 6 months ago, and it was supposed to be time limited. It was a great deal because just to have one application is £17.58 a month, so it was less than half price, and you got 3 applications. The good news is that that is now a permanent deal, and it's now known as Creative Cloud Photography. It will cost you £104.86 a year. That is not actually that much more than Photoshop Elements, and you do get an awful lot more for it. For a start, you get all the synchronization that you've seen me using tonight. You get your 20 gig of storage. You also get your Behance profile. So we've talked about Behance before. It's a platform to showcase and discover photography, graphic design, illustration, lots of stuff. It's lots of social feedback and crowdsourced feedback on works in progress. So you've got that available. And a new addition is that you now have access to Typekit. And if you think I'll never use that, trust me, you will. It is cloud-based sourcing for fonts. Now, these fonts can be used on the desktop and the web. There are some that are desktop only, some that are web only, some that are both. If you were to go and buy those fonts to use, the current price would be over £40,000. What you can do with these fonts is download them and install them locally via Typekit. So it's via your Creative Cloud app in your menu bar. So the whole thing is controlled via your Creative Cloud subscription. And it works beautifully. It really does work beautifully. So another great addition, considering it's less than £105 a year. But I'm not getting any money for promoting Adobe stuff, by the way. I just think that that is a very, very good deal. But coming on to more about us, and next month our session is Adobe Bridge. And it's actually a forerunner to a trilogy that is following in August, September and October. So Bridge, I'm going to concentrate on what Bridge can do in terms of asset management. And one of my perennial questions is, well, there's Bridge and there's Lightroom, so which one should I use? Well, once we've looked at Bridge in August, we'll be looking at Lightroom. And I'll be taking you right from the beginning of Lightroom. I've got a really soft spot for Lightroom, as that many Mac users here tonight will be able to tell you. But I'll tell you more about that on the night. But I have a very soft spot for Lightroom. So that's on the 14th of August. We're following that the month after in September by looking at Adobe Lightroom on mobile platforms. And one of the announcements last week at the keynote from Adobe was that as well as Lightroom for iPad, there is now a version of Lightroom available for the iPhone. So we'll be looking at both of those in September. And then in October, we'll be really ramping it up and looking at automating Lightroom. And we've done automating Photoshop. So we'll be looking in similar terms of how you can automate Lightroom to do a lot of the work for you. And that is in October. But as I said, I have been Elaine Giles, and you can find me all over the internet as Elaine Giles, but specifically my blog at elainegiles.co.uk and Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., etc. So thank you very much for attending. We are going to head off into Q&A, but if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. So please do get in touch with me. I really would love to hear from you. But that's it from me until next time, and I will indeed see you next time.